Day 17. Jake awoke the next morning curled up in a fetal position on the couch. He looked at the clock on the mantelpiece and it read 8:04 a.m. He guessed he slept in a little bit longer than he wanted to. He had a hard time as he tried to sleep last night. Steve woke him up several times when he screamed from his nightmares. Jake assumed Steve had probably awakened the entire household because of his nightmares. Jake looked to the other couch and saw Bo had already gotten up and was gone. He noticed Bo had folded his blanket and laid his pillow on top of it and sat them on the right arm of the couch. Jake sat up and yawned and stretched a couple times before he stood up and folded his blanket and placed his pillow on top of it and sat it on the other couch alongside Bo's. He walked into the kitchen and found everyone sitting at the kitchen island drinking coffee. Jeannie was at her food bowl and was eating scrambled eggs and sausage. At least that's what the aroma throughout the kitchen smelled like anyway, Jake thought. Marissa said, "Good morning. Get a cup of coffee and pull up a stool." "What's up?" "We've been discussing your car that's still sitting up near the old bridge." "What about it?" Jake asked as he yawned. "You have insurance on it, right?" "It's fully insured." "Why?" Jake asked as he splashed creamer into his coffee and sat down. "Well, to file an insurance claim, the adjuster will have to come out and take a look at your car." "Yeah," Jake said as he sipped his coffee. "What are you going to tell the adjuster when he asks what happened to your car?" "I haven't thought about that. He won't believe the truth. That's what we've been discussing." "Bo's come up with a pretty good solution," Brian said. "Listen to what he's got to say." Bo asked, "Is there anything in the car that you need?" Jake said, "Like I said the other day, the only thing in the trunk is the spare tire, jack, and tire iron. There's nothing in the car itself except for the owner manual, a few cassette tapes, and maybe some loose change." "Good," Bo said and took a sip of coffee. "I think what I can do is have my dad bring his flatbed tow truck back here and use it to turn your car upright and then pull it onto the tow truck. We'll take it a mile or so back up the road, and he and I will flip it over the riverbank and it'll look like you just had an accident." "What about your truck?" Jake asked, his left eyebrow raised. "I only carried liability insurance on it, and it's totally destroyed because of the fire and all. I'm not even gonna worry about my truck. I can get another one anytime I want." "Do you think your dad will be willing to do that?" Jake asked. "I don't see why not. I'll have to make arrangements with the adjuster to come out after I get back home." "What happens if the adjuster gets attacked by a bigfoot when he comes out to look at my car?" "That'll be the insurance company's problem then," Brian said, a smile on his face. "You get word to me when the adjuster is supposed to come out and I'll meet him at your car and keep a lookout." "Okay, I will. I need to go have a smoke." Everyone followed Jake out to the porch. He let Steve sit in his chair. He sat down on the steps and sat his coffee cup down beside him on the porch and lit up a cigarette. Brian said, "As soon as you guys are ready, we'll load your stuff up in my truck and I'll take you all to Buckhannon." Jake said, "I want to drink my coffee and I still have to pack my bag." "I've already packed your bag for you," Steve said. "It's sitting at the top of the stairs beside mine." Marissa said, "I saw that beautiful quilt you had in your bag yesterday when I did your laundry. Did your grandma give it to you?" "Yeah, well, sort of," Jake said. "I found it in the retreat the other night, and it looked like the one she used to make. I didn't want to see the creatures destroy it, so I took it. When I tell the owners of the retreat what happened, I'll give it back to them." Jake looked at Steve. "Since I didn't get a chance to talk with you directly this morning, how did you sleep last night?" "I had a lot of nightmares. Some were so bad I woke myself up screaming. I woke up in a cold sweat this morning." "Yeah, I heard you scream a few times last night. You'll probably have many more nightmares over the next few months, or years for that matter," Jake said. Steve said, "You're probably right." When Jake finished his coffee and cigarette, he thought about lighting up another one. He knew he only had one cigarette left, and he wanted to save it until they got to Buckhannon and smoke it while he told everyone goodbye. Jake said, "I guess I'm ready." Bo said, "I'll go upstairs and get your and Steve's bags and carry them down. I want to go get my .44 to take with me just in case," Brian said as he stood up. Bo beat Brian back out to the porch. He sat Steve and Jake's bags down near the top of the porch steps beside Jake. Marissa asked, "Do you guys care if I ride along?" "No, not at all. There's plenty of room," Jake said and asked, Are we gonna bring Jeannie? I plan to, Marissa said. Jeannie can ride in the back of the truck in the cargo hold next to your and Steve's bags. Jake said, Good. Then I'll get to pet her for a little while longer before Steve and me head back home. What do you mean? Marissa asked, her forehead puckered, eyes narrowed. Jake asked, head tilted and eyes narrowed. What do you mean? What do you mean? Aren't you taking Jeannie back home with you? Bo said he can't have a dog where he lives. I've already told you the story about Brian and his German shepherds, Marissa said. I know, Jake said. I had a long talk with Brian the other night when we were alone on the porch when Bo was upstairs taking a shower and you were in the kitchen, or when you were in the great room reading your book. I don't remember which, but anyway, I talked Brian into keeping Jeannie as a surprise for you. No, you didn't, Marissa said, a twinkle in her eye, a huge smile across her face. Oh yes I did, Jake said. You'll have to talk to Brian about it when he comes back outside. How'd you do it? Marissa asked excitedly, her eyes and nose crinkled, the corners of her mouth raised. It was pretty easy, actually. Brian saw how Jeannie laid there and protected you the other night when we returned from our search. That was the night when you sat on the porch reading your book. She wasn't really protecting me. I had my .357 laying there beside me. I know, I saw it laying there when I went into the house. If you remember, you left it out here laying on the bench when you went back inside to cook dinner, and what I did with it when I came back out here on the porch to smoke afterwards. What did you do with Marissa's gun? Steve asked, his brow furrowed as he sat up. Jake said, I believe I shot and killed the Bigfoot that guarded my car and made the bridge collapse. It stood within 5 feet of the porch when I shot it with Marissa's .357 Magnum. Marissa keeps it loaded with hollow point bullets, and a single shot took it down instantly. That huge-ass Bigfoot that guarded your car and made the bridge collapse? Steve asked, his eyes and mouth opened wide. The one that originally kidnapped me? Yeah, I shot it directly between its eyes and blew the back part of its skull clean off along with half of its brain. It also destroyed my car. I forgot to tell you that. Bo told me about your car this morning, Steve said. If you killed it that close to the porch, what did you do with its body? You know other creatures would have come in to retrieve it. Bo said, Jake and me hogtied the ankles of it together, and we towed it way over on the other side of the White's property and left it laying there. Brian told me he used the hose to wash away the blood and tissue after we made it back from dropping the Bigfoot off, Jake said. Steve said, Wow, at least you got the bastard. How did any of this convince Brian we should keep Jeannie? Marissa asked. Jake said, I mentioned to Brian about how the Bigfoot stood on the other side of the Bronco when I came outside to smoke, and how Jeannie would never have allowed a Bigfoot to get that close had she been outside on the porch. She would have barked and would have warned you well ahead of time. Brian said he realized that. I told him Jeannie was a good watchdog, and she would make a great companion for you when you are home by yourself. I also mentioned how Jeannie acts like she's always lived here. She's taken right up with you too. I told you and Bo that when you first showed up here with her, Marissa said. Brian stepped back outside and carried his .44 strapped into its holster. He stepped off the porch and walked over to the truck and unlocked the tailgate so Steve and Jake could put their bags back there. They picked up their bags and stepped off the porch. They walked over to the back of the truck and stowed their bags on the right side of the cargo hold and made sure they left plenty of room for Jeannie to ride in the back beside them. Jake helped Jeannie into the back end and then closed the tailgate. Brian had already unlocked the truck and sat in the driver's seat by the time Jake got around to the passenger side. He climbed into the back seat. Bo sat behind Brian, Steve sat in the middle, and Jake sat behind Marissa, who rode in the front passenger seat next to Brian. Brian started the Bronco and turned around in the driveway. He made a left turn at the end of it and headed back out to the hard road. Brian slowed down as they passed the collapsed bridge so Marissa and Steve could see all the damage. Marissa said, It's a wonder that any of you survived the bridge collapse. Yeah, Bo said. We were pretty damned lucky with that aspect of our ordeal. What a mess, Steve said. And look at your car. Jake said, Don't remind me, as he shook his head. Brian continued on, and they reached the hard road without incident in about 15 minutes. Jake thought, This truck sure can handle the ruts and holes in the old dirt road a lot better than my Grand AM could. I'm gonna have to get me a truck to replace it." When they turned left onto County Route 50, Jake knew they were pretty much home free. It was all hard road that led into Buckhannon. Jake daydreamed while he petted Jeannie as he reached over the back of the back seat. Steve slept most of the way. Bo looked like he was daydreaming like Jake had been. He stared out the window but wasn't looking at the scenery which passed him by. Marissa and Brian sat up front and carried on a quiet conversation. Jake overheard Marissa ask Brian, "Why didn't you tell me about the dog?" Brian said, "I wanted to keep her as a surprise for you." Marissa leaned over the middle console and gave Brian a kiss on his right cheek. "After we drop these guys off, we are going to have to stop by the grocery store so I can get a few groceries and get Jeannie a bag of dog food." Jeannie barked softly. They entered the Buckhannon city limits about 45 minutes later, according to the clock on the dashboard. Brian asked Bo, "Where do you want dropped off at?" "You can drop us off at my dad's shop. This is Tuesday and he'll be at work until 6 o'clock tonight," Bo said. "That's where my Mustang's parked anyway." Brian said, "You're gonna have to direct me through town to where your dad's shop is." Brian drove through town while Bo pointed to where Brian had to turn to get to his dad's shop. They pulled into the parking lot and Brian parked his Bronco in a shady spot underneath a tall oak tree. Jake woke Steve up and told him where they were. Brian put the back window down a little bit for Jeannie so she could get some fresh air. They got out of the vehicle and Jeannie jumped over the back seat of the truck and sat there when Brian opened the tailgate. Jake reached into the truck and over the back seat to pet Jeannie and tell her goodbye one last time. He closed the tailgate before everyone walked over to the garage. Bo's dad worked on an old station wagon in the center of 5 repair bays. He looked up and saw Bo approach with everyone walking behind him. Bo's dad wiped his hands off on an old rag and walked outside to greet them. Bo introduced his dad to everyone and said, "This is my dad. His name's Richard." Richard shook hands with everyone and said, "Please call me Dick." Dick looked everyone over and asked, "Who are all these people, son?" "Don't worry, Dad. I'll tell you all about it over dinner," Bo said. "Okay," Dick said as he looked at everyone. "It's nice to meet all you folks. I need to get back to work." "It's nice to meet you too, sir," Jake said. "Likewise," Steve said. Marissa said, "It was nice to meet you as well." Brian shook Dick's hand and said, "I'm sure I'll see you again. I need to get some work done on my truck." Dick turned around and walked back over toward the old station wagon. Bo pointed to his teal-green Ford Mustang that sat across the parking lot opposite where Brian parked his Bronco. "I have to go inside the office to get the keys for it. Go ahead and put your bags in the back seat. The doors should be unlocked." Jake and Steve walked over to the Mustang and put their bags into the back seat. Jake lit up his last cigarette, and they walked back over to join Brian and Marissa. Jake thought to himself, "I'm now gonna have to make good on my promise to quit smoking." By the time Bo came back outside to join everyone, Jake and Steve had already thanked Brian and Marissa for all they had done for them over the past week, and they said their goodbyes. Brian handed Jake his keys and a $50 dollar bill. "What's the money for?" Jake asked. "The money is for gas and to get Steve and you something to eat on your way home. I'll send the money back to you as soon as I get home," Jake said as he thanked Bo. "Don't worry about the money, just take good care of my car." "Don't worry, I will. I'll have it back to you within the next week or so along with the $50 you just loaned me." Jake looked over at Steve and asked, "Are you ready to go?" "Let's roll," Steve said. Jake and Steve said their final goodbyes and gave everyone hugs all the way around. As Jake hugged Bo goodbye, he thanked him for everything that he had done for both him and Steve. Jake said, "I'm gonna miss you." "I'm gonna miss you too," Bo said. Jake looked at Brian and Marissa. "Take good care of Jeannie. I'll have to come back and visit sometime to see you all of you. I'll definitely remember to bring a few guns and a shitload of ammo with me." Everyone laughed. Jake looked at Bo. "I'll see you in about a week." He flicked his cigarette, but to the ground while he and Steve made their way back over to Bo's Mustang and climbed inside. He fired up the engine and backed out of Bo's parking spot and turned the car to head out of the parking lot. They waved goodbye as they turned left onto Main Street. They were now on their way out of town. They drove about 10 miles before they picked up Interstate 79 north. Jake looked over at Steve and said, "This is the first leg of our journey that'll lead us most of the way." Back home,